Is Nigel Farage really the true man of the British people? Ordinary British folk, I believe, is the term that he keeps using. A very German word.
I will spend a considerable amount of my time in this constituency with you, fighting for those who don't have their own voice.
I love it, absolutely love it. Nigel Farage is the man who's going to save Britain, and he's going to save Clacton whilst he's doing it.
But do you really think he cares about Clacton?
Absolutely.
He's what this place needs, he's what the country needs. It's just the whole political system is just shot to bits. The whole country needs him.
I like him because I think he is like a wasp.
WASP, a term that means White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, normally associated with the KKK.
And I think we need someone like that in this country.
I think the difference is he's in touch with the public. He knows what's happening outside of the London bubble. He's more in touch. He calls a spade, he has a backbone.
Funny, I thought he went to one of the most exclusive private schools in the country and worked as a trader in the City of London. And it's interesting all these people in Clacton having this opinion about Nigel, because it was announced today that he's earning more than £1 million a year for non-MP work. So in this video, we're going to dive deep to find out if Nigel, who claims to fight for the average citizen, is really living up to his word. I think you're going to be a bit surprised at already the reactions that are coming out of Clacton about his behaviour. And we're going to break this video down into 3 parts. Money. Is Farage really against the elite? Representation. Is he truly representing the people of Clacton? He's only been in there a month and it's already interesting to see how much people are starting to push back against him. And is he part of the elite? A career politician? Stick around as we reveal the truth behind the headlines and ask, who is Nigel Farage really fighting for? And remember, we're just asking questions. Is Nigel Farage really against the elite, or is he benefiting from it? So if it was about the cause, you wouldn't think he'd be going around bragging about the money, and yet here he is bragging about the money, and also how he can wangle the system.
Presents 4 working days and 1 journey.
What's that in English money?
Well, we're talking about £1,900. It's a good job, this. I mean, I reckon I worked it out, because so much of what you get is after tax. But if you used the secretarial allowances to pay your wife, on top of all the other games that you could play, I reckon this job in sterling terms is worth over £250,000 a year to you. That's what you'd need to earn working for Goldman Sachs or...
And then a few years later, here he is being confronted by a reporter from the BBC, Nick Robinson, who points out he's doing exactly what he said he was doing in that last documentary you watched. He's employing his wife in order to get more money in. But interestingly, she's European, and he claims that no Brit could do the same job.
About Europeans taking British jobs, your wife is German. She's
Yes.
your secretary.
Yes.
She's paid for by the British taxpayer.
She came here as a highly skilled person, earning a high salary, paying a very large amount of tax. It all goes to show. Nobody must think.
Was
we
your
are-
wife
we
taking
are
someone
anti.
else's job?
No, because I don't think anybody else would want to be in my house at midnight, going through emails and going to be briefed for the next day.
In 2009, people in the UK were very shocked at the expenses scandal that had taken place in Westminster, where MPs had been using money to buy all sorts of things, from moats to dovecots. And of course, Nigel Farage came out and complained about it and said the public were outraged. And yet, have a listen to this.
I mean, we'll talk through some of the detail of that specific claim, but what it all goes to illustrate, as you pointed out in the past, is that you MEPs are wallowing in a jacuzzi of expenses cash.
No, they're not expenses. We don't actually claim for anything. I have not claimed for an office. I have not claimed this figure of £15,000. The Times, who are the pro-establishment newspaper, have deliberately tried to conflate the expenses row in Westminster, where people have been using taxpayers' money to buy houses and make large capital gains, with the way the system in the EU works. Now, by the way, I'm not defending this system. I want it to end. But I get given, as does every other British MEP, £3,580 every month to spend in the United Kingdom and in my constituency as I see fit.
So you're given it. Well, let's go through some of the detail, because they've got that claim, haven't they? That it costs about £3,000 a year to run the office. It is, of course, as we said earlier, rent-free. Where does the other £12,000 then go?
OK. Now, allowing for the fact that this is a non-story anyway, because how I spend that money is up to me, and I spend
to just interject
prosecute.
here. It is ultimately taxpayers' cash, Mr. Farage. We pay, as
Yes,
you,
it is
as your
taxpayers'
party
cash.
points out, we pay
Yes,
a lot
it
of
is.
money to the
Yes, it is
European Union as
taxpayers' cash.
taxpayers.
Amazing how much of a reversal that was. My money, it's mine, to, oh, it's the taxpayers now. Yes, that's a good point you made that I can't argue with.
OK, but I mean, it sounds like it must be a sauna in there. Do you know what the average, and they're very expensive, dual fuel bill is per household in the UK? You say you spend £3,000 on a 600 square foot office. Do you know what the average bill is per household?
Just over 1,000.
Yeah. So how are you spending £3,000 then?
Well, they're not running. They're not running. Well, if you're calling me a liar, then you're joining the Times, whose story's just fallen to pieces, and you're joining Dennis McShane, who was the last person who accused
£3,000 on electricity. What are you doing in there? What do you run in there?
Running machines, running banks of computers,
what machine?
Running
banks of
photocopiers,
computers,
doing things that use a lot more electricity than many household chores.
Sounds like Tracy Island then. You've got banks of
you're
computers.
doing the same thing. You are doing exactly the same thing.
What was he doing in there? What things is he up to? Why can't he give a straight answer? Does that sound trustworthy? Remember, I'm just asking questions.
What the Times is trying to do, you are trying to conflate the expenses regime in Westminster, where people make claims, with the EU system of fixed monthly allowances.
Well, listen, we've agreed. I'll tell you what. You know, we all should be concerned. I'll tell you what we're doing. We've agreed it's taxpayers' cash. We know the regime, and it's far from perfect in the House of Commons, which you have criticised MPs' behaviour, most notably Maria Miller in the past. But they have to account for things like this. They have to give us receipts. They have to let us examine them. And if they overclaim, they have to repay them. You say you're given the cash and you spend it as you feel free on campaigning for UKIP. Is that right?
That is how the European Union works. It's one of the reasons I don't want us to be a member of it.
How much did you claim? How much did you claim? What, being an MEP for 15 years? How much, not claim?
I don't claim any money.
How much have you received?
I don't know. If you take £3,580 a month, which is about the mean, and multiply it out, you will come to a figure.
He was an MEP for roughly 22 years. That's about 264 months. Times that by £3,580, and the figure you get is almost £1 million.
But the amount of money I'm given to do this job is exactly the same as the other 750 MEPs, and that's the point. And what is happening here is there is a false application here.
But is that the excuse? We heard it from the MPs on expenses, didn't we, when they were in all their troubles, that everyone else was doing it. That's no excuse, Mr Farage. You lead the party. You have to set an example.
And it wasn't done there.
It's one of hypocrisy. You criticise what you call the political class looking after its own and letting down the electorate, and yet here you take, well, let's say tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of pounds and of euros. You let it go into your personal account, and you don't really let us know where it all goes. You don't tell us how it's spent.
I've said since 1999 in my first campaign, elect us to the European Parliament, and we will use the wherewithal that this institution provides to fight against Britain's continued membership of this union. And that's why I've spent 15 years working damned hard the length and breadth of this country, trying to push that campaign. And given the rise in Euroscepticism, I'm beginning to think it might have had some effect.
What's that got to do with the money not being transparently shown to the public to show where you've been spending it? Transparency equals less corruption. Is Nigel being corrupt? Is he a corrupt person? Where does he spend that money? Is it on drugs? Who can say? Probably not. I'm just asking questions. And the hypocrisy didn't end there.
On live television to say that I will stick by my principles, I, Nigel Farage, would not accept this pension.
Oh, I'm not going to get it anyway, so it won't. I don't think this will even occur.
But if it did, you wouldn't take it.
Oh, of course I would take it. I've said that right from day one. Well, of course.
Okay.
Why should my family and others suffer even more?
This is the sort of hypocrisy that we see.
No. I said it from day one. It is not hypocrisy. I've just voted to get rid of my job. I was the turkey that voted for Christmas. How's that hypocrisy? If it was hypocrisy, I'd have said we should stay in the EU.
But it wasn't quite done. I also found this little clip.
No, not as skint as I was.
According to one report, you earned £800,000 more than your salary at the...
in the last 5 years, yeah. I mean,
in the last year?
Yeah, fake news. Fake news, to quote my friend Donald Trump.
So just on the record,
since 2014. That was what the article said.
But so you weren't skint last year when he said he was skint?
I'm still in debt, but it's not as bad.
But if you earned that money over the last 4 years, you weren't skint when he said he was skint.
I'm still in debt, but it's not as bad as it was.
Considering Nigel is now on a wage of about £1 million a year and that's been declared inside Parliament, I find it really funny that he keeps claiming that he's ordinary and he's skint and he knows what it's like to be the common man, and yet throughout his entire life he has lived a very privileged lifestyle. Does Nigel represent the people of Clacton, or is he representing himself?
All they do is rob you, basically.
What, the Tories and Labour?
Yeah, they don't do nothing for this country. They're all rich people and they only care about themselves.
But isn't Nigel rich? Haven't I also shown that he seems to be caring a lot about himself, more so than maybe the public?
But are you in fact a kept man?
Whatever you want to bore on.
It's a legitimate question about the money that you were paid by Arron Banks between 2016 and 2017, funding your lifestyle and your political operation to the tune of almost £500,000 that year.
3 or 4 times that, I'd have thought.
So £13,000 for the house in Chelsea paid for by Arron Banks? True or not true?
So is there a European election next week?
Yeah, we'll ask about that in a minute.
Good.
But can we talk about the money? Can we talk about the money for a second?
No, not really.
So £5,000 for the bodyguard and driver a month, £13,000 for the house in Chelsea a month. You said in 2017 that you were skint, that there was no money in politics, but there clearly was quite a lot of money in it for you, wasn't there? Yes or no? Why do you want to talk about these things? I mean, none of this is illegal, but this is important. You're running for public office. It's a matter of transparency.
It certainly is. We've got a democratic election next Thursday, which is all about democracy, and you won't even talk about it.
You rail against the elite, the metropolitan elite in London.
I rail against people like you. You're
exactly.
Quite right.
And yet you're living the lifestyle of the elite, or you were, financed by very rich friends.
Let's go back to Clacton. Let's have a listen to what the public was saying at the beginning of this, and then we've got a bit of an interesting interview.
I think the difference is he's in touch with the public. He knows what's happening outside of the London bubble. He's more in touch. He calls a spade, he has a backbone.
But I know that he's a man that speaks the truth and steps forward.
We've come to see Nigel, and hopefully he'll be an MP and he'll be able to speak for us in Parliament.
And yet, it's been 6 weeks and people are already calling in to complain about Nigel.
I've written twice to Nigel Farage already. About 2 different issues, local issues, because we've got plenty of them here in Clacton, and I have yet to receive so much as an email back from him.
According to data on responses to correspondence from MPs and peers in 2021, the average response time for MPs responding to people contacting them is meant to be about 20 days, and about 60% in 2021 managed to do that.
And I'm not impressed, because I know I'm not going to. And I don't know what people in Clacton thought they were going to get when they voted him in, but if they honestly think that he cares about this dirty little town, they've got another thing coming, because he doesn't care about us at all. Having 2 media jobs, how can he possibly make time for the people of Clacton? It's not good enough.
And he's spoken in the House of Commons once.
He's spoken twice, and he's voted twice.
Yeah. I really don't think people... I just don't understand why people would vote somebody in who is so obviously using Clacton as a vehicle to further his own interests.
And it wasn't just Ollie's show on LBC that was getting calls. So did this show with Mark Wright.
And I'm aware that many people in Clacton have been trying to get in touch with him as their local MP and have failed to do so. That one might be forgiven for thinking that Nigel Farage isn't actually doing his elected job to the best of his ability, that he's shortchanging his constituents.
Is Nigel really different to the career politicians that he condemns?
There's a huge disconnect that has built up between professional career politicians and ordinary people. Career politicians.
He went to private school and he worked in the city as a trader. And then for 20 years he worked as an MEP, earning millions, both in wages but also in expenses. And then on top of that, he's also got a huge pension. And according to Byline Times, Farage was one of the worst attendees in the European Parliament. This was exacerbated by the Fishing Committee attendance record, where Farage in his entire time as an MEP attended 1 out of 42 meetings with the Fisheries Committee. And considering the damage that he has caused through his Brexit to the fishing community, I find it highly ironic that he's still going around trying to claim that he is a man of the people, when he destroys careers, families, lives and incomes. And of course, now as an MP, none of this really seems to have changed, and all we have to do is look at his voting record, speech record, and the fact that people in Clacton are complaining. And when it comes to talking about the people, the ordinary folk, well, this is what his second in command had to say this week.
We're now on a sort of an escalator ever upwards of union demands for ever bigger pay rises, and that's going to be a catastrophe for the UK's finances.
You mentioned pay there, and I've got to ask you about the extra earnings earned by Nigel Farage from his media commitments, 1.2 million a year.
Competition is a good thing. People performing, working very hard, earning things, we should aspire to that. We want more of that.
It sounds like somewhat of a contradiction to me.
Doesn't it? I mean, of course it does, but life is full of all sorts of strange ironies.
Is Farage really an outsider? Or has he become what he claims to stand against? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Once again, a big thank you to all of my supporters on YouTube and on Patreon. If you'd like to help out with the channel or even just buy me a coffee, links are in the description. Once again, thanks for listening. Bye for now.